The gravy was still steaming when my mother threw my suitcases onto the rain-soaked pavement of Beacon Street. "You don't belong in this family, Scarlett. And you damn sure don't belong in this building anymore," Eleanor Vance barked, her diamond rings catching the harsh glow of the street lamp. Behind her, my sister Harper stood in the grand marble foyer of the Revere Apartments, holding a glass of Pinot Noir and smiling. Half of the Thanksgiving guests had spilled out onto the balconies above us, peering down like spectators at a Roman Colosseum. I was 29 years old, drenched to the bone, holding a single damp cardboard box containing my life's work, while my own mother publicly branded me a thief in front of Boston's elite. "Mom, please," I whispered, my voice cracking as the freezing November rain lashed against my face. "I've run this building for 5 years. I built the rooftop lounge. I saved us from bankruptcy. You managed our property, Scarlett." "Like a hired servant," Harper called out, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "But the board voted this morning. Effective immediately, I am taking over as principal CEO of Vance Holdings. Your employee lease is terminated. Get off our property before we have the police drag you away." The humiliation was a physical weight, crushing the air out of my lungs. The guests above started whispering, their muffled laughter cutting through the sound of the downpour. My mother stepped back into the warmth of the lobby, the heavy brass doors clicking shut behind her, locking me out in the cold. They thought they had just stripped me of my home, my career, and my dignity. They thought they completely controlled the Vance empire. But as I wiped the rain from my eyes and looked up at the towering, historic facade of the Revere Apartments, a cold smile crept onto my face. My mother and sister had just evicted me from a multi-million-dollar luxury building that they didn't actually own. The rain didn't stop, and neither did the shaking in my hands as I sat in my battered Honda Civic, watching the lights of the Revere Apartments glow warmly against the Boston night. I was the foster child who never quite fit into the polished, old-money aesthetic of the Vance bloodline. When Eleanor adopted me at age 7, it wasn't out of charity. It was a public relations stunt to soften the image of her husband's ruthless real estate firm. Once my adoptive father passed away a decade later, the mask slipped entirely. I became the invisible workhorse, while Harper was groomed to be the public face of the dynasty. For 12 years, I poured my soul into Vance Holdings. I was the first one in the leasing office at 5:01 a.m. and the last one scrubbing the marble floors after midnight VIP events. Harper spent her 20s vacationing in Saint-Tropez, but Eleanor always assured me my loyalty would be rewarded. "You're a true Vance. Scarlett," she would whisper when she needed me to pull an all-nighter, to fix a plumbing crisis or audit a fraudulent tax report. "The Revere will be your legacy." I believed her. I believed her right up until tonight, when Harper decided she wanted a shiny new toy to present to her wealthy fiancé's family, and Eleanor decided a foster daughter was entirely disposable. I pulled my car away from the curb, the tires splashing through the puddles that mirrored the grand building. They thought they had left me with nothing. They thought my 5 years of sleepless nights were just cheap labor they could write off. But what Eleanor and Harper never bothered to learn during their champagne-fueled board meetings was the actual history of the ground beneath their feet. My adoptive father hadn't bought the Revere Apartments alone. He had a silent partner, a reclusive, eccentric investor who owned the land trust the building was constructed upon. As I drove toward a dingy 24-hour diner on the edge of the city, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was an automated alert from the city registry. The deed modification paperwork Harper had forged to push me out had just been officially uploaded to the public portal. They had officially taken the bait, completely unaware that the silent Partners Land Trust had expired 3 months ago, reverting 100% of the land ownership to a single private beneficiary. The neon sign of the diner buzzed overhead as I spread my soaked documents across the scratched Formica table. The smell of cheap coffee and grease filled the air, a stark contrast to the truffle butter and aged ribeye I had been denied at the Vance Thanksgiving table. My phone sat next to my mug, screen illuminated with a dozen frantic text messages from the Revere's building staff. "Scarlett, Harper just ordered us to change the locks on the main office." "Scarlett, they're throwing away your files." I didn't reply. Let them throw away the paper copies. The only files that mattered were safely encrypted, on the thumb drive burning a hole in my pocket. For 30 years, Vance Holdings had paid a monthly land lease fee to an entity known simply as the 1924 Avalon Trust. My adoptive father had set it up that way to shield his most valuable asset from lawsuits and predatory lenders. Eleanor always assumed the trust was just a dummy corporation my father used for tax evasion. She never bothered to look at the beneficiary clauses. She didn't know that my father, riddled with guilt over how Eleanor treated me, had quietly transferred the entire trust into my legal name on my 25th birthday. According to the strict terms of that historic land lease, if Vance Holdings ever missed a single payment, or if the building's management engaged in fraudulent structural modifications, the land lease would immediately terminate. And when a land lease terminates in the city of Boston, the building constructed on top of that land legally forfeits to the landowner. The first crack in their perfect empire was already living in Unit 4B. Her name was Mrs. Gable, an 82-year-old widow who had lived in the building since before I was born. Harper hated her. Mrs. Gable's rent-controlled lease was a blemish on Harper's vision of a purely elite luxury high-rise. Just before my eviction, Harper had signed an illegal eviction notice to force Mrs. Gable out, intending to gut Unit 4B and turn it into a private tasting room for her wealthy friends. Harper had even forged my signature on the structural demolition, permits to keep her own hands clean. I took a slow sip of the bitter coffee, watching the rain strike the diner window. Harper thought she had framed me for an illegal eviction and an unapproved structural demolition. She thought she was killing two birds with one stone, getting rid of an old lady and guaranteeing my legal ruin. She had no idea that Mrs. Gable wasn't just a random tenant. She was my godmother, and she had been recording every single one of Harper's illegal threats. On a hidden camera, I installed in her living room a shredded paper trail. By 3 a.m., I was parked 2 blocks away from the Revere, watching the silhouettes of moving men carrying boxes out of the back entrance. Harper wasn't wasting any time. She was clearing out my office, destroying any evidence that I had ever run the operational side of Vance Holdings. My phone vibrated. It was a restricted number. Scarlett? It was Marcus, the night security guard. I had hired 3 years ago when his family was on the brink of homelessness. His voice was laced with panic. They're using a heavy-duty industrial shredder in the main office. Harper's fiancé, Preston, is here too. They're shredding the original tenant ledgers and the historical maintenance logs. Let them, Marcus, I said calmly, my eyes fixed on the distant glowing crown of the building. Are they touching the digital backups? Preston tried to log into your master account, but you changed the passwords, right? He's furious. He's telling Harper they need to completely wipe the local server, frames to reset the system. Perfect. Let them wipe the local servers. A cold adrenaline rushed through my veins. The local servers only held the front-facing operational data, the superficial stuff like valet, schedules, and catering invoices. What Preston didn't understand about network security was that the Revere smart lock systems, utility grids, and main financial routing were hardwired into a decentralized cloud network, a network that was registered under my personal LLC, Avalon Operations. By wiping the local servers, Harper and her fiancé weren't erasing my footprint. They were accidentally severing the building's bridge to its own vital organs. Marcus, I need you to do one thing for me, I instructed, my voice dropping to a whisper. Go to the basement electrical room. Under the main breaker, there's a small gray box with a blue fiber optic cable. Unplug it. What does that do? It takes the Revere completely off the municipal grid's automated backup, I replied. From this moment on, if the main power fluctuates, the building won't automatically correct itself. It will require a manual override key. And who has that key? Marcus asked, a faint realization creeping into his tone. Only the person who designed the system, I said. Keep your head down, Marcus. Don't let them see you do it. Your job is safe, I promise. I hung up. I looked down at the physical master key resting in my palm, the heavy, brass manual override. Harper wanted to play corporate dictator and completely erase my existence from the family business. She was about to find out what happens when you delete the only person who knows how to keep the lights on. The morning sun broke through the gray Boston fog, casting a pale light over the city. I hadn't slept a wink. Instead, I had spent the dawn hours inside a cramped, fluorescent-lit office belonging to Arthur Pendleton, my late father's trusted real estate attorney. Arthur looked at the stack of certified documents sitting between us on his mahogany desk, then up at me over his reading glasses. Scarlett, you realize what will happen if you execute this land lease termination? It won't just bruise Eleanor's ego. It will financially liquidate Vance Holdings within 30 days. They threw me out like trash on Thanksgiving night. Arthur, I said, my voice dead calm. They tried to frame me for an illegal eviction. They're destroying historical building records. And Harper is currently sitting in my chair pretending she built an empire. They liquidated my humanity. I'm just returning the favor. Arthur sighed, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. He had never liked Eleanor's ruthless snobbery either. The legal framework is airtight. When Harper signed those unapproved demolition permits for Unit 4B yesterday, she violated Section 9 of the Historic Preservation Clause in the land lease. The moment I file this paperwork with the city registry, the lease officially defaults. Do it, I said. There's one more thing, Arthur warned, pulling out a sleek black folder. Harper and her fiancé, Preston, have invited the city's top investors to a grand rebranding gala at the Revere this coming Saturday. They're announcing a $50 million expansion project to turn the building into a hyper-exclusive private club. They've already taken millions in non-refundable deposits from Boston's elite. They're selling memberships to a building they're about to lose, I murmured, a spark of dark amusement igniting in my chest. Exactly. If you strike now, they'll scramble and find a legal loophole to delay the eviction. But if you wait until that gala, Arthur trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. If I wait until the gala, they will ruin themselves on a public stage in front of the exact people they desperately want to impress. I finished. I stood up, shaking Arthur's hand. The trap was set. My mother and sister were floating on a cloud of unearned victory, completely unaware that their multi-million-dollar expansion project was being built on shifting sand. As I walked out of the law office, my phone chimed. It was an email notification from the automated building management system. Harper had officially changed the master billing account for the Revere's main water and electrical utilities, from Vance Holdings to her personal name, trying to claim the tax write-offs. She had just personally assumed the liability for a storm she didn't see coming. I spent the next 48 hours tucked away in a tiny, rented studio apartment in South Boston, surrounded by glowing monitors and empty coffee cups. To the outside world, I was a defeated, disowned daughter licking her wounds. But on the screen in front of me, I was systematically building a digital fortress that would lock my family out of their own lives. Through Avalon operations, I still held the administrative rights to the Revere's primary vendor contracts. I watched in real time as Harper began frantically trying to renegotiate with our long-term suppliers, the premium linen companies, the high-end catering crews, and the private security detail I had vetted myself. She didn't realize that these businesses didn't stay loyal to the Vance name. They stayed loyal to me. I had paid their invoices on time for 5 years, and I had protected them when Eleanor tried to stiff them on holiday bonuses. On Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Leo, the head of the elite catering company handling the upcoming grand rebranding gala. Scarlett? Thank God, Leo breathed down the line. Your sister Harper just called me, demanding we change the entire menu to imported, caviar and vintage, champagne for Saturday night. But she's refusing to pay the standard 50% deposit up front. She told me the Vance name is payment enough. Is she out of her mind? She thinks she's untouchable now. Leo, I replied, leaning back in my chair. Here's what I want you to do. Agree to all her demands. Don't ask for a dime up front. Leo hesitated. Scarlett, that's over $80,000 in luxury inventory. If she defaults, my business takes a massive hit. She won't default on you. Leo, because Avalon Operations is going to formally guarantee your contract through a blind escrow account this afternoon, I said smoothly. You will get paid every single penny, no matter what happens on Saturday night. But in exchange, I need you to make sure your staff follows a very specific timeline for the evening service. What kind of timeline? When the clock strikes 9 p.m., I told him, I want every single bartender, server, and coordinator to immediately drop what they are doing, walk out of the building, and lock the service entrance behind them. There was a long pause on the line, followed by a low, appreciative whistle. Consider it done, Scarlett. By Friday night, every major vendor for the gala had signed a secret secondary agreement with Avalon Operations. Harper was planning the party of the century, entirely funded by credit lines and unearned arrogance, completely blind to the fact that her entire supporting cast was wired to vanish at my command. I looked out my window at the distant skyline, where the revere's rooftop lights flickered against the clouds. The stage was set, the actors were in place, and my mother and sister were about to give the performance of their lives. By Saturday evening, the exterior of the Revere apartments looked like a Hollywood red carpet. Massive searchlights sliced through the crisp Boston air, painting the historic brick facade in pillars of dramatic white light. Valets in crisp black tuxedos lined the curb, parking Lamborghinis, Bentleys, and Maseratis belonging to the city's most powerful developers, politicians, and old money families. From my parked car across the street, wearing a sleek, floor-length black silk dress hidden beneath a heavy winter coat, I watched the spectacle unfold. Harper stood near the velvet ropes, draped in a diamond necklace that had once belonged to our grandmother, a piece she always told me I wasn't blood enough to wear. She was laughing, her hand resting possessively on Preston's arm as he chatted up a city councilman. Eleanor stood beside them, her posture rigid with an icy, triumphant pride. They looked like royalty celebrating a coronation. I checked my tablet. The digital traffic inside the building's network was spiking. Over 200 high-net-worth individuals had checked through the front doors, each paying a $25,000 initiation fee to join the exclusive Revere Club. The total pool of non-refundable deposits sitting in Harper's newly established business account was just over $5 million. At exactly 7:30 p.m., Arthur Pendleton sent me a text message. The emergency city registry filing is complete. The land lease has officially defaulted due to structural fraud and illegal tenant harassment. Legally, the Vance Holdings Corporation no longer owns the Revere apartments. You do. The execution order has been signed by a judge. My heart hammered against my ribs, a cocktail of fierce adrenaline and profound anticipation coursing through me. For years, I had been the ghost in the machine. The girl who kept the empire running while being treated like an inconvenient charity case. I opened a specialized terminal app on my phone, linking directly to the Revere's main environmental control systems. I could see the temperature in the grand ballroom was a perfectly conditioned 68 degrees. I could see the smart locks on the main entry doors were drawing heavily from the municipal power grid. I stepped out of my car, letting my heavy coat drop onto the driver's seat. I adjusted the collar of my black silk dress and walked straight toward the brilliant white lights of my own building. The countdown had begun, and the hosts of the evening were about to realize they were trapped inside a house of cards. The bass from the live jazz orchestra vibrated through the limestone steps as I approached the main entrance. The scent of expensive cologne, roasted duck, and floral arrangements hung thick in the crisp night air. I stepped into the bright ring of the paparazzi lights, my heels clicking sharply against the granite pavement. The head bouncer, a massive man named Brandon, whom I had personally hired and given a holiday bonus to just last month, caught sight of me. His eyes widened under his polished tuxedo cap. He instinctively moved to unhook the velvet rope, but before he could, a sharp, manic voice pierced the chatter of the crowd. "What do you think you're doing here?" Harper stepped forward, her eyes flashing with a mix of shock and pure venom. The diamond necklace around her throat caught the flashbulbs of the nearby photographers. Beside her, Preston crossed his arms, looking down his nose at me with a smirk that made my skin crawl. "I came to celebrate." "Harper," I said, my voice smooth, carrying effortlessly across the entrance. Several high-profile guests in line paused, turning their heads to watch the unfolding drama. "It's a big night for the family." "You are not family, Scarlett." Eleanor's voice was like ice as she stepped out from the warmth of the foyer, her face twisted in disgust. "You are an ex-employee who was terminated for gross incompetence. Brandon, remove her from the property immediately, before I have her arrested for trespassing." Brandon looked at Eleanor, then back at me, sweating despite the freezing air. He didn't move. "Did you hear me?" Eleanor hissed, her old money composure fracturing for a split second. "Throw this girl out." "Don't put him in a difficult position, Mom," I said, a faint, dangerous smile playing on my lips as I took a half step closer. "I wouldn't want you to cause a scene in front of the mayor's chief of staff. That would be so incredibly embarrassing for the Vance name." Harper took a step forward, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. "You think you're smart, Scarlett? You're nothing. You're a charity case we kept around to do our dirty work. Look up at this building. Every brick, every light, every single dollar walking through these doors belongs to us. We won. You lost. Now crawl back to whatever gutter you came from. I looked up at the towering facade of the Revere, then back into my sister's triumphant, blind eyes. I checked the gold watch on my wrist. It was 8:45 p.m. Enjoy your party, Harper, I whispered softly. You really did throw a beautiful event. I turned on my heel and walked back toward the shadows of Beacon Street, leaving them laughing on the red carpet. They thought they had just won the ultimate victory by turning me away at the gates. They had no idea that I was counting down the exact minutes until their entire world went completely dark. At exactly 8:59 p.m., I stood inside the building's hidden basement electrical room. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and humming transformers. I looked at the gray manual override box, my fingers gripping the heavy brass key. On my tablet, the ballroom camera feed showed Eleanor taking the stage. She tapped her microphone, the sharp chime echoing through the glittering crowd of 200 multimillionaires. Beside her, Harper and Preston beamed, holding crystal flutes of vintage champagne. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the new era of the Revere Club, Eleanor announced proudly into the microphone. Tonight we celebrate the absolute power of legacy, bloodline, and vision. We have officially purged the old management, and under my daughter Harper's leadership, Vance Holdings is proud to accept your exclusive membership deposits for our $50 million expansion. The crowd erupted into applause. Harper raised her glass in a triumphant toast. The clock struck 9 p.m. On my screen, Leo's catering staff instantly stopped pouring champagne. They dropped their serving trays, spun on their heels, and walked out the service exits in a silent, coordinated exodus. At the exact same moment, I turned the brass manual override key in the breaker box and pulled the primary power relay. Thump. The entire multi-million-dollar high-rise plunged into pitch black, suffocating darkness. The sound of shattering glass and panicked gasps echoed through the ballroom feed before the camera cut out. The backup generators, severed from the grid by Marcus hours earlier, failed to ignite. The heavy, automated smart locks on the grand entry doors immediately went into security, lockdown, trapping everyone inside the pitch-black foyer and ballroom. I walked up the concrete basement stairs, using my phone's flashlight, and entered the grand ballroom through the service door. The room was chaos. The elite of Boston were shouting, using their glowing cell phone screens to navigate the darkness, while Harper and Preston screamed for the building engineers. Suddenly, the massive emergency spotlight above the stage flickered to life, cutting through the darkness like a theatrical beam. But it wasn't illuminating Eleanor. It was illuminating me, standing at the back of the room with Arthur, Pendleton, and 3 high-ranking officers from the Boston Police Department and the City Registry. "What is the meaning of this?" Eleanor shrieked, spotting me through the beam of light. She stumbled down the stage stairs, her face pale with rage. "Scarlett, you psycho. Did you sabotage our grid? Officers, arrest her. She's trespassing and destroying our property." "We can't arrest her, ma'am," the lead police officer said, his voice echoing clearly across the suddenly silent listening ballroom. "Because according to federal and city land deeds, you are currently the ones trespassing on her property." A collective sharp gasp rippled through the crowd of 200 elite guests. "What are you talking about?" Harper yelled, her voice cracking in a high-pitched panic as she rushed to her mother's side. "This is Vance Holdings. We own this building." Arthur Pendleton stepped forward into the light, holding a stack of certified, gold-sealed court orders. As of 7:30 p.m. tonight, Vance Holdings has officially defaulted on its historic land lease due to illegal tenant harassment and fraudulent structural demolition permits signed by Harper, Vance, per the strict terms of the 1924 Avalon Trust. 100% ownership of the Revere Apartments, its structural assets, and its financial accounts has reverted immediately to the sole beneficiary. Arthur turned to me, bowing his head slightly. "Scarlett Vance?" The silence in the room was deafening. Eleanor gripped the edge of a table to keep from collapsing, her eyes wide with horror. Harper looked like she had been struck by lightning, her hands shaking so violently that her champagne flute slipped and shattered on the marble floor. No, this is impossible," Preston stammered, pulling out his phone. "We checked the corporate registry. She's a foster kid. She has nothing." "You checked the corporate shell," I said, stepping forward, my voice ringing out with an absolute authority that commanded the entire room. "But you never checked the dirt you built your lives on. You threw me out in the rain like trash, thinking you had all the power. But the truth is, I've owned the ground beneath your feet for 4 years. And tonight I'm taking my building back. I looked over at the crowd of investors, who were already staring at Eleanor and Harper with expressions of pure disgust and betrayal. Furthermore, I announced loudly, the $5 million in Oz membership deposits you all paid tonight were deposited into accounts tied to a corporation that no longer has any legal right to this property. Vance Holdings is completely insolvent. They cannot build your club and they cannot refund your money. Angry shouts erupted from the billionaires in the crowd, turning fiercely on Eleanor and Harper. My mother looked at me, her face completely stripped of its old money arrogance, replaced by a desperate begging terror. She had publicly humiliated me on Thanksgiving. And now, on her biggest night, I had utterly destroyed her dynasty in front of the entire city. The fallout was swift, brutal, and completely televised. By Monday morning, the front page of the Boston Globe featured a glaring photo of Eleanor and Harper being escorted through a wall of paparazzi by corporate fraud investigators because Harper had personally assumed utility liabilities and signed fraudulent building permits under her own name. She couldn't hide behind the corporate veil of Vance Holdings. The $5 million in non-refundable deposits they had taken from Boston's elite were frozen by federal order. Within 2 weeks, the lawsuits from the city's most powerful developers stripped my adoptive mother and sister of their remaining assets, their luxury vehicles, their sprawling suburban estate, and their polished reputation vanished into a black hole of legal debt. Vance Holdings was dead. 1 month after the catastrophic gala, the air was crisp and clear as I stood on the rooftop lounge of the Revere Apartments. The morning sun cast a brilliant golden glow over the city of Boston, reflecting off the Charles River. The heavy brass doors behind me opened, and the soft, familiar clicking of a cane echoed against the stone tiles. I turned to see Mrs. Gable walking out onto the terrace, wrapped in a thick wool coat. She wasn't leaving Unit 4B. In fact, her rent-controlled lease had just been converted into a lifetime deed of occupancy, entirely free of charge. It's a beautiful view from up here, Scarlett, Mrs. Gable said softly, standing beside me and looking out at the skyline. Your father would be so incredibly proud of what you did. You didn't just save his legacy. You saved the people who actually cared about it. Thank you, Godmother, I whispered, wrapping my arm around her shoulder. For everything. As she headed back inside to the warmth of the lobby, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from an unknown number. I opened it to find a desperate, rambling message from Harper. Scarlett, please. Mom is staying in a cramped studio apartment in Southie. She's sick from the stress. I'm working an administrative retail job just to pay our legal fees. We have nothing left. Please, you're a Vance. You can't leave your own family on the streets. I stared at the glowing screen for a long moment. I thought about the little 7-year-old girl who had spent her childhood trying to earn a crumb of affection from a mother who viewed her as a PR stunt. I thought about the rain-soaked pavement on Thanksgiving night and the cruel laughter of the guests looking down from the balconies. They hadn't just thrown me out. They had tried to erase my humanity. They only cared about family. Now, because the power dynamic had completely shifted, I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel malice. I just felt a profound, liberating emptiness where their control over me used to live. I didn't reply to the message. I quietly blocked the number, locking the past away forever. I turned my back on the text, looking out over the grand historic building that I now rightfully owned. Avalon Operations was thriving. The building staff had received a 20% raise, and the Revere was finally a home, not a cage. I took a deep, clear breath of the morning air. For 29 years, I had lived in the shadow of a golden bloodline that didn't want me. But as I watched the sun rise over the empire I built with my own hands, I knew I was finally free.